Coming up on Double Tap TV.
We dive into Apple's macOS and find out just how accessible it is.
The latest tech.
I'm Alexa. I can answer your questions.
Interviews.
There will be several dozen shows trickling in over the months.
Accessibility.
We're actually running a pilot scheme with the CNIB at the moment.
This is Double Tap TV.
Welcome to another amazing edition of Double Tap TV. I am Marc Aflalo, as always, joined by Steven Scott. Welcome to this week's edition, Steven. So excited to be back on the air here talking to you, even though we're kind of stuck inside, aren't we?
Well, I think we've actually done pretty well here because we kind of manufactured all of this show out of the basic premise that you just don't want to sit beside me. So this has kind of worked out rather well for us.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. It's nice to kind of be in my own little space. But you know what? It also gives us the opportunity to lend that perspective, that global perspective about where we are in our worlds, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a frightening time for a lot of people, but we're going to basically bury our heads in the sand for the next while and talk about tech. I think that's a good idea.
That is a very good idea, and you know, this week I want to dive into accessibility, but I even want to get more pinpointed. I want to talk about accessibility on one particular platform. So we're going to start this by asking you a true or false question. I know this is going to be difficult.
Okay.
But true or false, Steven?
Right.
The Mac is one of the most accessible computers that you can buy yourself today.
True.
Ding, 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 ding. Okay. Now, this is something that I think that when you have a disability of any kind and you use the accessibility features on a Mac, you know this. This is kind of like old school. Of course, you know the Mac is the most accessible computer out there. But why is it that the Mac is the most accessible, and how did it get to this point?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's the most accessible platform, but it's not the only most accessible platform anymore. And I think that's important to say right at the top, because things have changed a lot in the last few years. If we were talking 5 years ago, actually, do you know what? Even 3 years ago, I think you would probably argue that a lot of the technology, other computers, weren't quite as accessible as the Mac has been for some time. Now, I think the reason for that is because Apple have obviously put a huge amount of effort into making their products accessible. From the point of, you know, you buy a Mac, for example, you're able to turn on VoiceOver or Zoom or many of the features we'll be talking about today. But it's not just that they've been put in there, it's how well they've been crafted as well. They actually work. Yeah, unfortunately for PC users, for Microsoft users, for many years, they've had to rely on Jaws, which is a third-party application. If you're needing a screen reader, and you work in a professional environment, you want to use Jaws. And that's because the narrator, which is essentially the VoiceOver equivalent, as in it's built in and it's free, and it's on every single machine, it just wasn't up to scratch. That's improved a lot over the past couple of years. A big push towards better accessibility on the PC side, which is good, but it's kind of still playing catch up. And if you're comparing narrator and VoiceOver, VoiceOver's much better. It's built to do the job for anybody. And interestingly, Mark, there only is one screen reader on a Mac, and it's VoiceOver.
So here's a question for you. Can you remember any kind of pivotal point where a Mac became that accessible when VoiceOver was first introduced? Was there something? Because I'm trying to figure out when Apple made this decision to get so behind VoiceOver and to make sure it was so well integrated into the operating system that when people develop for their platform, all the features are already there. The whole feature set is there. And this is important because it goes, you know, it follows suit to all their operating systems, whether it be on the iPad OS or the iOS platform as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's been versions of VoiceOver kicking around for some time. There's been a lot of speech synthesizers added to the Mac over the years. When I was growing up at school, and we're talking kind of mid-90s, there was really not much. You could use it, but it was very primitive. And it wasn't called VoiceOver at that time. It was just a simple synthesizer. And oftentimes you had to have a box added onto the computer to make it all function, because the computer itself didn't harness enough power to do it. Now, of course, when they developed VoiceOver, that all changed. It all kind of started because of a campaign by the National Federation of the Blind in the States, where they had gone to Apple to say, why are you not making your iTunes University content, iTunes U, why are you not making that content accessible to blind students? And the rumour goes, and whether it's true or not we'll never know, but the rumour goes that it was at that point that Steve Jobs got wind of this and said, well, look, if we're going to do it, Let's do it, but do it right and do it across everything we do. So it was almost a decision made at that point, and that would stack true because, as you know yourself, Mark, when Steve Jobs was at Apple, every decision ran through him. Nobody had a say apart from him. Nobody went off and did their own thing. He decided everything. So it would follow suit that was the decision made by him, that accessibility became a part of every product, but it was also done well.
Now, I know we're going to be talking specifically about the Mac computer today and the Mac OS because they recently released an update, 10.15.3. But before we dive into those features, I wanted to go back to Windows for a second because, as you said, JAWS had been really the only way to really navigate a Windows PC for so long. But are they catching up on the narrator side?
It's getting there. I mean, I get kicked repeatedly when I say to people, hey, you should try out Narrator. And they're like, no, don't say that, because then what happens is, Freedom Scientific might lose custom and therefore development would slow, and Narrator's not at a point to take over yet. Remember, we're talking here specifically about people who maybe work in the fields of science or mathematics. Something like JAWS really is a very powerful tool for those people who are in those professions. Narrator is not at that level. For someone like me, who's using it for email, who's using it for surfing the web, who, maybe a bit of audio editing on the computer, basic tasks actually, Narrator is fine. But there are a lot of things, and even on the very basic level, like I can control when JAWS speaks. Like, say I'm in an editing program, right? Let's think about this. You know what this is like, Mark. You're editing a piece of audio. What you do not want is a voice constantly talking all over the top of that edit, because if you hit the space bar and it says play, you're not going to hear what the audio behind it is, so you're not going to make sure if you've got that edit right or not. You can actually get really dig into the settings and customize how JAWS works on each individual program that you run. So that's something that's good, and there's a little bit of that in VoiceOver as well.
Well, this week we are going to be focusing in on Mac OS, as I alluded to earlier. The recent release is 10.15.3. We're going to cover a couple things in terms of accessibility, and you're going to go hands-on as we continue the show. If you guys at home have something that you want us to talk about, or comment or feedback on anything that we do talk about on this week's show, the email address is feedback@AMI.ca, or you can hit us up on Twitter. It is @DoubleTapCanada, and use the hashtag AskDoubleTap. So we take a quick break, and when we come back, we go hands-on with the Mac operating system and all those accessibility features. This is Double Tap TV.
For more great Double Tap TV content, visit AMI.ca/DoubleTap. This is Double Tap TV.
We are back on Double Tap TV. Mark Aflalo with you. Before we get back to Steven, let's remind you that if you want to get in touch with us, the email address is feedback@AMI.ca. On Twitter, we are @DoubleTapCanada, and use the hashtag AskDoubleTap. Bringing back Steven Scott on the show. Steven, it's time to dive into some of the accessibility features available in the latest release of Mac OS X. What have you got in store for us today?
Yes, that's right, Mark, and there are many accessibility features. Now, I can't show you them all because I would be here forever. There are just so many of them. If you've got hearing problems or motor or dexterity issues, there is an accessibility feature built into the Mac for you. But of course, for blind people, there are really two main functions. There's more than two, actually, but I'm going to show you two main accessibility features that exist inside the Mac. Now, the first one is VoiceOver. Now, I've got my computer in front of me here, and I have VoiceOver switched on. That is the voice that turns everything visual on the screen into something audible. So when you look at an icon, I can actually click on that icon and hear what that icon is instead of trying to read the text on screen. Of course, if I have no vision, I wouldn't be able to do that. So VoiceOver gives me that capability. Now, to operate VoiceOver, you use what's called the modifier keys. So there's a series of shortcuts you have to learn to use, and I think it's really important to say at this point that if you're not a touch typist, you may struggle a little bit here. You really need to know your keyboard to know how to use VoiceOver, because essentially everything you do, every interaction you make with the computer will be through the keyboard. I should also say that VoiceOver is available on not just a Mac, but also on any other Mac, whether it be a desktop Mac or a Mac Mini, or perhaps an iPad or an iPhone, or even the humble Apple Watch that I'm wearing at the moment. Even the Apple TV has got full VoiceOver support, as does the HomePod as well. Even the three buttons on the top of the HomePod have got VoiceOver on top of them as well, which is, just incredible when you think about it. So let me show you around and show you some of the VoiceOver functions, how they work as well, and how I essentially use a Mac with little vision. So I'm going to hold down those modifier keys. They are Control and Alt. Or Option, some might call it, because it is, can be the Alt key or the Option key, depending on how you look at it. So let me hold down, as Mac people would call it, the Control and the Option keys, and that is the modifier key. So any key I now press will action only VoiceOver commands. So VOD, VoiceOver D, takes me to the dock at the bottom of the screen, to the bottom left.
Dock. Podcasts.
Now, it's actually dropped me onto podcasts, which is not at the beginning of my dock. It's actually further in, but that's because I've maybe been there already today, and I do enjoy a podcast or two. So because it's dropped me on that, I can open that, and to action something, all I do is hold down the VO keys again and press space, and that acts like my left click.
Press Finder, Desktop, Steven's Mac. Podcasts, window. Welcome to Apple Podcasts. Text.
Now, because I recently updated my computer, I've got this window that's opened up, and it's telling me welcome to Apple Podcasts, and I can navigate that in a couple of different ways. I can use my VO keys, and I can use my left and right cursor keys on the computer. So I could use the right cursor key to move down this or move along this list. I don't know what it is. It could be a list up and down or side to side, but we'll find out. I'll just use my right arrow key to move along.
The new home for podcasts on your Mac. Listen to your favorites and discover new shows you'll love. Text.
Okay, so it's telling me that that's new podcasts on there, and I can enjoy them. I'm sure there's a button here somewhere.
Siri suggestions. Text. Siri suggests shows based. Data on your podcast. Listen. Start listening.
Okay, well, start listening is the button I want to press. So again, VO space to live click on that.
Start listening.
And there you go. I'm now in, and I can now navigate and listen to podcasts or whatever I want to do. To get out of a program, you can use standard Mac commands, which to close a program would be Command Q to quit, right? You might have used that yourself, irrespective of being blind or not. Well, all the standard commands work as well. They all work alongside. So again, I can hold down Command and I can press Q.
Quit podcasts.
And that takes me back to my desktop. So, very quickly I'm able to navigate the computer and open up apps and navigate, send emails, even send texts, because it's a Mac and it works so closely with the iPhone. I can browse the web, I can look at my pictures, I can do all that stuff I want to do, and all of it is fully accessible. But I want to show you another thing. For partially sighted people, let's not forget the partial people, or the partially sighted people, I should say, or the partials, as the blind folk like to call us sometimes. There is a feature on here called Zoom. Now, it's not to be confused with Magnifier. Magnifier is a very different thing you would have on your iPhone, but Zoom exists on the Mac for partially sighted people who might struggle to see the screen, but have enough usable vision if they could just get that little bit closer, if you could just enlarge that text a bit more. Now, in order to use Zoom, all you have to do is set it up in accessibility settings, and I'll show you that in a minute where you can find all this. But once you've set it up, you hold down the Control key and you take two fingers and you swipe up on your trackpad. Swipe up, two fingers, and you'll notice, Mark, that the screen is suddenly getting a lot bigger. And that's me. I'm now in a position where I can navigate the screen with my cursor and keep focus on the center of the screen, be able to see where I am, so I can zoom in even further if I want, and suddenly I'm right up against the toolbar at the very top of the screen. And if I wanted to, I'll just switch VoiceOver off for a second.
VoiceOver off.
I can just click on that with a tap, and I can navigate down, and very easily I can see, much more easily, the text that I'm trying to read. You can enhance the cursor size as well if you feel like it. You can do many, many things. Now let me turn VoiceOver back on, because I want to quickly show you where everything lives.
VoiceOver on Finder, Desktop, Steven's Mac.
So for VoiceOver specifically, once you've got VoiceOver on and you're using it, there's a neat little trick I'll show you in a minute. But to get to the accessibility features and actually just have a look around, I mean, you don't need a special password or a special key to get in here. These features are available for anybody to use. So Mark, if you think actually some of these features would be good for me, then check them out. So to find them, I'm going to go to the dock.
Center. Dock. Podcasts. Finder. Desktop. Dock. Podcasts.
Now it's dropped me onto podcast again. I'm just going to type SYS for system preferences, and it'll take me right to the icon.
System preferences.
See? And then I do VO space.
Finder, Steven's Mac. System preferences, window, toolbar.
And suddenly I'm into my preferences. I'm going to navigate by using my VO keys and my right arrow again.
Steven Scott. Apple ID. Family sharing. Update Apple details. Preference panes.
Now what it's done is it's taken me to this block of preference panes, and instead of me going through all these individually, I have to interact with these, which is a wonderful little feature. Can be a little bit daunting at first, but once you've got the hang of it, it actually makes perfect sense, believe it or not. Let me talk you through that. So you hold down the Shift key and the VO keys and the down arrow, and what that does is it sort of drops me into that list. So I'm now in to the collection of icons here, rather than having to try and navigate them all individually, or try and work out where I am. It also gives you a sense of place as well, that you know this is a group of items. That's quite important. Okay, so to very quickly get to accessibility, just type ACC.
Accessibility.
There you go, and VO space takes me to it.
Loading accessibility window, toolbar.
And then I'm in. So I've got all my accessibility features here.
Accessibility features. Overview.
This is my group.
So in accessibility, vision.
And in here I've got VoiceOver, Zoom, display, lots of settings in there to change the style of the screen. Maybe you want to invert the colors or change to grayscale because you have difficulty with color. Speech options, so if you don't want VoiceOver on, if you don't want it taking over your whole computer, maybe you've got an eye condition like retinitis pigmentosa, for example, where you've only got a very small amount of vision, perhaps at the center. You don't have any peripheral vision. You might miss notifications off to the side of the screen. You can turn on these speech options, which will give you the ability to get to know what's going on by speaking out to you. You can even have the screen flash if you prefer it to do that.
Descriptions.
And descriptions in there as well. That's to turn on where maybe you're on YouTube or you're on a website, and if there are audio descriptions available, the system will add them on. That's just some of the features I'm showing you. Trust me, Mark, there are millions more in there. We just don't have the time to go into all of them, but really interesting, comprehensive guide there for you that you can find on the computer with instructions as well on the Apple website.
Yeah, those features are so cool, Stephen. It's honestly really cool how they're baked in to the operating system themselves. But there's one feature you've been holding back on, and we're going to get to after we take a quick break. It is Double Tap TV. He is Steven Scott. I am Marc Aflalo. We take a break and come back with one last feature in Mac OS X.
Love Double Tap TV? Listen to AMI Audio for Double Tap Canada every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern for news and reviews on everything tech. This is Double Tap TV.
Welcome back to Double Tap TV. He is Steven Scott. I am Marc Aflalo. Thank you guys for being with us. Before the break, we dived into a couple features available, accessibility features available in the new Mac OS operating system 10.15.3. But there's one feature, Steven, that you've been holding back on that you're going to go into detail right now, are you not?
Yeah, Mark, there are a ton of wonderful accessibility features available on the Mac. I mean, you saw two of them in the last segment. But there is one that's just been added, you're right. One brand new feature that's just been added to the Mac. Now, this isn't for blind people particularly. This is for people who have issues where they cannot even use the keyboard or the mouse or a trackpad or indeed any ability to touch the computer at all. And what's wonderful about this feature is it allows you to control the Mac entirely using just the movements of your head as I move from side to side, left to right, up and down. And if we switch to my computer once again, the cursor, you might notice, is moving. And as I move my head from left to right, the cursor moves left and right. If I move my head up and down, the cursor moves up and down. And I'm holding my hands up to the camera as well as I'm doing this. I'm not touching the computer at all. It's like magic. I feel like David Copperfield or Penn and Teller sitting here. It is absolutely incredible. And what is wonderful as well is you can control clicks as well. It used to be really expensive equipment you had to buy to do this, but now you can control even the clicks of the mouse, the left click, or the right click, even drag and drop items as well. Now, I have not mastered this, and I don't have the ability to be able to click on anything with any certainty of what I'm actually clicking on, because I have to sit at a reasonable distance away from the screen to do this. But it does show you the capability that the computer now has, and all it's using is the webcam on the MacBook itself. That's it, nothing else, just the webcam. And as you can see, as I move my head around, the cursor just goes with me. If I wanted to click on something, I just pull my head up. And obviously, you need to have a certain amount of training with this, get the distancing right and all of that. But it is just an incredible piece of technology, and the fact that we're able to do this now. And this, of course, will work in conjunction with things like voice control. So you may not be able to touch the computer, but you might be able to speak to it. So, you imagine the capability of being able to click on something using a facial expression, and they give you options to smile, stick your tongue out, raise your eyebrows as well, and all of those will give you different functions. You can assign all of them to suit yourself, or not, as the case may be. But you could add voice control to this as well, where you can speak to the computer and give it commands to say, open Safari, go to this website, download this file, open the file. All of that is possible now. And that's one of the key things about accessibility on the Mac itself, is that you can run a lot of these functions together at the same time. I can have VoiceOver, I can use Zoom, I could use Head Pointer, I could have voice control, all operating at the same time, and they all work flawlessly together. I will say one thing. I did say at the top, this is not maybe a feature, Head Pointer feature is maybe not a feature for blind people, but there is maybe something in this for people who are partially sighted. You might remember earlier I showed you Zoom, the ability to zoom into the screen, to capture a portion of the screen, make it much bigger. Well, let's do that again. So again, hold down my control key, use my 2 fingers to swipe up from the bottom. Does Head Pointer work with this? Wow, it does. It actually does. It's a bit not perfect, but then maybe because I'm using an older computer, it's not quite as perfect as it would be on a newer one, but it does work. I mean, it's moving. Now, I'm not able to see what I'm actually pointing at per se, but if you have got enough vision to sit far enough back from the computer to do that, then you could potentially benefit from this. So people with certain eye conditions might find this really useful. Not having to physically use a mouse to move around, just use your head. Isn't it incredible?
You know what, Steven? That's actually more than incredible, considering they can do face tracking with that really bad camera on the front of those MacBooks is quite insane, to be honest. But it's cool that it's there, and it's cool that it actually works. Thank you guys for being here this week. Those are all the accessibility features, or at least some of the accessibility features that we wanted to profile for you guys. If you've got some that you want to tell us about, or you want to talk about some of the things that we've talked about on this week's show, more than welcome to email us. It's feedback@AMI.ca, or you can hit us up on Twitter. It is @DoubleTapCanada with the hashtag AskDoubleTap. Thank you again for being here. On behalf of Steven Scott, I am Marc Aflalo. We will speak to you again next week here on Double Tap TV.
For more great Double Tap TV content, visit AMI.ca/DoubleTap.
Hosted by Marc Aflalo and Steven Scott. Editing, Will Attar and Marc Aflalo. Production assistants, Wendy Kaufman. Integrated Describe Video Specialist, Ron Rickford. Coordinating Producer, Jennifer Johnson. Director Production, Karen Nye. Director Programming, Brian Perdue. VP Programming and Production, John Melville. President and CEO, David Arrington. Copyright 2020, Accessible Media, Inc.